They've done it all. They have won it all. That is a statement you hear not all the time, but you do hear in professional wrestling. And given that we have two major wrestling promotions in America, whether you like that or not, I think it's a good idea to look at the idea of some of these guys and girls going back and forth between AEW and WWE. Hello, Internet. Welcome to Only Kind of Everything. And this is the top 8 swaps I would make from AEW and WWE and vice versa. Now, if you can't follow that, it's effectively just me going, hey, here's some people who are in Company A that could use a refresh or might do better in Company B. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying that some of the obvious picks that may or may not be happening or have happened before this video or as this video is coming out, such as Malachi Black and Miro/Rusev, I'm not doing. I want to keep this interesting. So, the first trade, if you will, would be Chris Jericho going back to WWE. Now, the reason I'm picking Jericho is multifaceted. I'm a big Jericho fan, and it's not that I don't think what he's done for AEW is bad. You can't understate Jericho being the first AEW World Champion being important. Chris Jericho was for a long time a very integral part of that company. Now, not so much. You have this idea that there's this Jericho vortex, that people get drawn into these feuds with Chris Jericho and don't really come out any better than they went in. You have the allegations that Jericho really may not, have the same passion that he did when AEW was formed. I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but if I'm Triple H and I can get Chris Jericho, one of the first things I'm going to try to do, I'm not putting the world title on Jericho by any means. I really do at this point think the world title should be a younger man's game. Younger man. But I am absolutely reinvigorating Chris Jericho. If, from an optics standpoint alone, if Triple H can get Chris Jericho back to the... No, you can't. To say peak is a challenge because peak Jericho depends on who you're talking to. But if you can make Chris Jericho big again in the eyes of the internet fandom, in the eyes of the fans, where Jericho is getting reactions and not just the go away type reaction, I would say that's a huge, huge win for Triple H. And honestly, I feel like that's a win for Jericho. I feel like, in my opinion, Jericho deserves the biggest swan song send-off that he can get. He has been integral to AEW. He has been a huge part of professional wrestling. He deserves the best when he goes out. And if AEW can give that to him, that's great too. Now, I did say we're going back and forth. So, the first team that I think should be going from WWE to AEW is the New Day. The reason I'm kind of doing the New Day as a unit, I might be cheating and saying that's 2 in 1, but Kofi, specifically Kofi, but Woods in a way as well, they really have, in terms of the tag team division, done it all and won it all. Kofi Kingston has done it all, won it all, except maybe King of the Ring, but Xavier Woods has that. The only thing you could realistically say for Xavier Woods in WWE is a singles title. And I just don't think that's going to happen for Woods in WWE. If you move the team over to AEW, though, you get a fresh, really, truly fresh set of opponents for these guys to work with. You have opportunities for both of them in the singles division that probably just don't exist in WWE. Be it the Ring of Honor titles, the TNT title. It's just the New Day in AEW presents so many options, not least including, maybe go back to FDR where those guys can have good matches. You can have that dream moment of the Young Bucks versus the New Day. So there's lots of options that you can get with that. The next one I'm going to talk about here is actually another WWE to AEW, and that is in the form of Charlotte Flair. Again, this is another woman who's kind of done it all, won it all in WWE. Outside of just facing off against talent as they're coming up, there's nothing left for Charlotte Flair in WWE. Whereas in AEW, even if she maintains that same role that she has in WWE, she has a huge variety of opponents that she's never faced. And these aren't like, and I'm not dogging Tiffany Stratton when I say this, but this isn't Tiffany Stratton level opponents who are, really needing to find their way. You have your Mariah Mays, you have your Toni Storms, you have your Mercedes Moné. So you have these well-established women. Mina Shirakawa, I've heard that she is allegedly going to be signing full-time with AEW. There's another one. But you have these women who are, it's not that they're just young and hungry, but they're established enough that, Charlotte being this kind of sniper-esque, kind of go-for-the-throat character that she presents, if she goes for the throat on these people, it's not the end of their career. Whereas somebody like we're having the issue with Tiffany Stratton right now, there's really, Tiffany can only do so much against Charlotte. In AEW, Charlotte doesn't have the same pull that she does in WWE. That could be beneficial as well. I think another thing to consider too with Charlotte Flair is, Charlotte Flair is probably a little underrated with how well she actually is. And I think time in AEW would absolutely solidify just how good this woman is. The next move, it will be an AEW to WWE, and I'm talking about Kenny Omega. Now, I say Kenny Omega because I have been a fan of Omega for a while. And I do really think that Kenny Omega, in terms of AEW and even in New Japan, he is the epitome of done it all, won it all. I really think the only thing that Kenny Omega really needs to do in professional wrestling, and again, obviously, this is just my opinion, he needs to main event WrestleMania. I think that's something that can be done if Omega gets to WWE within the next year or so. That gives him, he's in the latter part of his career, but he doesn't have to work the super grindy schedule. He's a big enough name that he could get away with not. But Kenny Omega, I think he would be happy, and a lot of people would be happy if Omega never went to WWE and he proved that you can have a super successful career and never be in WWE. And that's great too. But from a business standpoint, man, there's money to be made. Even if it's not a Kenny Omega CM Punk match, which would absolutely make bank. You have Kenny Omega versus Randy Orton. You have Kenny Omega versus Gunther. You have Kenny Omega versus Jey Uso. You have Kenny Omega versus LA Knight versus Logan Paul. That one probably aggravated some people, but that's the point. There are fresh matches and opportunities for Kenny Omega in WWE that I just don't think are really there for him in AEW. And like I said, I feel that maybe WWE can provide him, the only, wrestling accolade that he's yet to do. That's main event of WrestleMania. But again, that might not be something for him. The next swap we're going to talk about is one that might surprise people, and I'm saying Samoa Joe to WWE. Now, why do I pick Samoa Joe, you might ask yourself? He's even been recently on Chris Van Vliet and saying that his time as an in-ring competitor is coming to an end, which I think is all the more reason that he would be a benefit to WWE. You have him on screen for as much time as you can get out of him. That man can make anything menacing. I guarantee you could give him a cookbook and be like, hey, tell me how to make chicken soup, and you're gonna be like, I don't want that chicken soup by the time he's done. That's just how good Samoa Joe is. But I think another aspect of Samoa Joe that would benefit WWE, and it would benefit AEW, would be his insight to the ring, his ability to be an agent, to be somebody who's scouting the next generation. Samoa Joe would be phenomenal at that. And I do selfishly would prefer Samoa Joe to be doing that for WWE than AEW. But another name that I think should be swapping, and I believe this is number 6 if I'm counting right, might not be, would be Braun Strowman to AEW. Now, you might be asking yourself, why am I picking Braun Strowman? Well, Braun Strowman is a big hoss boy. And not that AEW has a lack of these guys. Strowman is a good big hoss. Strowman also in the latter part of his career, the only issue with Strowman going over to AEW is with him being in the latter part of his career. He's not as explosive as he was earlier in his career. That could be a hindrance and maybe a bad choice to send to AEW. But I do think that Strowman could use the refresh of scenery. He's he's just done everything there really is to do in WWE, and going to AEW would at least provide a new scenery for him, and that could be beneficial to his overarching career. Another one that I think would be an interesting fit in AEW, it's ironically another big hoss boy, and it's nothing against him. I love what he was doing on Monday Night Raw, but Bronson Reed. And again, I absolutely love what Bronson Reed was doing before his injury. But I also want to keep this in the interest of fairness and not stack one side over the other. And Bronson Reed, I think, would be amazing for AEW as long as they booked him correctly. The dude is an absolute monster and could be a force to be reckoned with. Not just on Dynamite, but if you want to make him a Collision exclusive, something to tune into Collision for, man, he could destroy people. Him versus Adam Cole would be amazing. And I mean, that's just another one of those whoo type moments, man. The next move, though, is another women's roster move, and it does in a way kind of change a little bit of what I had mentioned earlier, but I do think Mariah May would benefit from a WWE run. And I don't mean that AEW has done her wrong by any stretch of the imagination. AEW has done great. She's been there for about 2 years, and that whole time she's pretty much been in a long run story with Toni Storm. And that, it ended with that amazing match. She held the title. Absolutely amazing run in AEW for her. And if you want that to be the end of her current tenure with the company, you've written her off beautifully. But I think in WWE, she would get a chance to work with some really unique talent as well. Kairi Sane, Bayley, Asuka, Tiffany Stratton to an extent. There is a lot of opportunity to work with some really talented women in that company. And again, this is not a knock to AEW, but most of Mariah May's 2 years has been spent with Toni Storm, for better or worse. She's definitely learned to work the Toni Storm style, which is great. But I would like to see what she can do outside of AEW. Now, again, this should be number 8. Again, I really haven't been able to keep track. I had this written down and then paper, as things do. The last trade that I think we should see, a lot of people might be thinking MJF or Jey Uso or something like that. I think actually probably the coolest trade that we could potentially do. We've talked about Jericho and all that. And this is a bit selfish again. I would love to see Edge and Christian back in WWE. It's looking like, as of recording, we are likely setting up for Edge and Christian to team up against FTR down the future, which is great. That's going to be an awesome match. Maybe if a New Day versus Edge and Christian match, but I think it would be interesting. Obviously what I'm about to say is everybody in the twilight of their career, but if any company could make this match work and it not be an absolute dumpster fire, it's WWE, and that would be the Dudley Boys versus the Hardy Boys versus Edge and Christian one more time. WWE is able to do these nostalgia matches probably a little better than most companies. And if you can get, you already have the Hardys who are in TNA, and there's talk of them doing a main roster run in the summer of 2025. You have the Dudley Boys, who are, I believe, at least under legend contracts to WWE. If you can get Edge and Christian under WWE umbrella, it will be the first time that you've had all three teams under contract at one time in like at least eight years, if not longer. I don't have the dates right in front of me, but it's been a while since all three teams have been under the same contract at one time. So I would really, really like to see that go through. But guys, that's all the time I have for this video. Let me know who you would send to AEW or WWE and vice versa in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And I will see all of you in the next video. Bye!